She told him, "You're nothing without me." What he became after the divorce destroyed her. The wine glittered under the chandelier while cruelty wore the mask of celebration. Laughter echoed, sharp and careless, as she lifted her glass and smiled like she had already won. "I'm divorcing this pathetic man," she said. And her family cheered as if humiliation were a holiday tradition. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked into the snow without a word. They thought they had buried a nobody. They didn't realize they had just created a man with nothing left to lose. Because when someone tells you, "You're nothing without me," what happens when they're wrong? The dining room glowed with borrowed warmth, the kind that came from chandeliers and candles, rather than from the people gathered beneath them. Crystal glasses lined the table like trophies, catching the light and scattering it across polished wood and expensive faces that had learned how to smile without feeling. Outside, snow drifted down in slow, patient sheets, softening the world beyond the tall windows. But inside there was nothing soft at all. He sat at the far end of the table, posture straight, hands resting calmly on his lap, eyes moving from face to face as if memorizing a room he already knew he would never return to. Nathan had chosen a dark suit that night, clean and modest, pressed with care, not to impress anyone but because respect had always been his habit. Across from him, Samantha shone in red silk, her jewelry flashing every time she moved her wrist, her confidence filling the room like expensive perfume. This was her family's house, her territory, her audience. Her father leaned back in his chair with her relaxed authority of a man who believed the world had always bent in his favor. Her mother watched everything with thinly disguised approval, measuring moments by how useful they were. Her siblings whispered and laughed, already drunk on wine and certainty, already convinced they were on the winning side of something they did not fully understand. Nathan had helped build this life piece by piece. He had been there when Samantha had nothing but ambition and a sharp tongue, when late nights and quiet sacrifices mattered more than applause. He had opened doors with patience instead of force, had smoothed over mistakes with humility, had stayed silent when credit drifted away from him and settled comfortably on her shoulders. He had done all of this believing that partnership meant standing slightly behind, sometimes so the other could shine. Tonight, he understood how wrong that belief had been. Samantha rose from her chair slowly, enjoying the attention, enjoying the way the room leaned toward her without realizing it. She lifted her champagne glass, the liquid catching the light as if it were alive, and smiled with practiced ease. The smile did not reach her eyes, but nobody there cared enough to notice. "I want to make an announcement," she said, her voice smooth, confident, perfectly rehearsed. The room hushed instantly. Even the laughter quieted, replaced by anticipation. Nathan felt the shift before the words came, felt it in his chest, in the subtle tightening of the air, in the way his name suddenly felt heavier than it had a moment before. "I'm glad to inform you," Samantha continued, pausing just long enough to enjoy the silence, "that I am finally divorcing this man." She gestured toward him without looking, as if he were a piece of furniture she was tired of pretending to like. "And frankly," she added, her smile sharpening, "he is nothing without me." For half a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the room erupted. Laughter burst out first, loud and careless, followed by applause that felt wrong the moment it began but continued anyway. Her father raised his glass in approval, nodding as if she had just made a wise business decision. Her mother smiled broadly, relief written all over her face. Her siblings clapped and laughed, feeding off each other's cruelty, eager to belong to the moment. Nathan did not flinch. He did not look down. He did not speak. He looked at Samantha then, truly looked at her, at the woman he had once loved, at the certainty in her eyes, at the way power had convinced her that kindness was weakness and loyalty was disposable. In that look there was no anger, no bitterness, only clarity, the kind that arrives quietly and changes everything. He stood. The chair slid back, with a soft sound that cut through the noise, just enough to draw a few glances. He buttoned his coat slowly, deliberately, as if each movement were a decision he had already made long ago. The laughter faltered in places, confused by his calm, unsettled by the absence of drama they had expected. Nathan walked toward the door without saying a word. He did not ask for understanding. He did not defend himself. He did not remind anyone of what he had given or what he had endured. He knew that explanations were wasted on people who had already chosen a story where he was small. At the door, he paused for just a moment, long enough to feel the weight of the house behind him. The years folded into those walls, the version of himself he was leaving there. Then he opened it and stepped into the cold. Snow touched his face immediately, sharp and clean, the air biting but honest. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Not a slam, not a statement. Just an ending. Inside, the party resumed. Louder than before, as if noise could drown out the faint discomfort creeping into the edges of the room. Nathan stood on the steps for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the cold settle into his bones, grounding him. He had walked away with nothing that night. No house, no title, no shared future. What he carried instead was silence, resolve, and a truth that would soon matter more than any of them could imagine. They believed they had destroyed him. They did not understand that they had just removed the only thing holding him back. The city at night was a cold, indifferent expanse, glittering with lights that promised life but delivered only distraction. Nathan moved through it like a shadow, coat collar turned up against the winter wind, hands buried deep in his pockets, mind stripped of chatter. Every step echoed against wet pavement, every footfall a quiet drumbeat, marking the first night of his freedom, a freedom that felt heavier than chains. He did not return home. He had no home to return to. Apartments could be rented. Furniture could be bought. A bed could be found, but none of that would erase the sting of what had been taken, of what had been declared nothing. Instead, he walked until the neon signs blurred into halos, until the cold reached the marrow of his bones, and the city felt empty enough to hold him without suffocating him. Hours passed unnoticed. The glow of street lamps painted long, lonely shadows, and in that solitude, Nathan began to untangle himself from the man they thought he was, the man who smiled, who accepted humiliation, who bent without breaking. That man had been convenient for others, predictable, soft, unremarkable. But he was gone now, melting into the snow, leaving only a shape that was defined not by what he had lost, but by what he would take back. He found himself in a small, neglected bar tucked between buildings that leaned on each other for support, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, it was warm, dimly lit, with the smell of wood and old whiskey wrapping around him like a familiar cloak. He sat at the end of the bar, ignoring the curious glances of strangers, the casual whispers, the clink of bottles. Nathan didn't drink. Not yet. He only observed, listening to the murmur of lives half-lived and choices half-made. And he realized how quiet courage could feel when no one was watching. A bartender, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and hands that had held more stories than she could ever tell, slid a glass across to him. He shook his head, but she didn't press. "You look like you've carried a storm," she said, matter of fact, pouring herself a coffee. "Storms leave tracks if you let 'em." He considered saying something clever, something to deflect, but he only nodded slightly. Words had been cheap for too long. Tonight, he measured everything by silence and observation. As he stared into the dim reflection of the bar's dusty mirror, a strange thought occurred to him. What if being nothing was exactly the point? Stripped of comfort, stripped of approval, stripped of the life that had been defined by someone else's terms, he could remake himself. Not the Nathan they mocked, not the man they thought was weak, but a version forged from quiet intelligence, from patience, from anger that was no longer desperate, but deliberate. He left the bar hours later, the city asleep or pretending to be. Snow had stopped falling, leaving a slick sheen on streets and sidewalks that reflected the dim yellow of streetlights. And in the stillness, Nathan began to notice things he had missed before: the strength in his own stride, the sharpness of his mind, the reality that every door he had once thought closed was only waiting for him to turn the handle differently. By the time he returned to a rented apartment. That smelled faintly of mildew and second-hand life. He was already planning. Not revenge, exactly. Too crude. Too easy, but a reinvention that no one could anticipate. He moved methodically, a notebook, a laptop, a single lamp illuminating a small, bare room. Maps, contacts, opportunities, all scribbled in ink. Ordered in logic, all pointed toward a future he intended to claim for himself. Brick by brick, without anyone's approval or applause. Sleep came late, shallow and fragmented. But even in that brief rest, there was a hum beneath his skin. A vibration of something awakening. The man who had been nothing was no longer asleep. He was calculating, observing, learning, preparing. And somewhere, deep in that quiet, he smiled, not a soft smile. Not a smile for anyone else, but a private one, the first in years. Because the truth he now understood was simple and terrifying. They had thought they had destroyed him, but they had only made him capable of a scale of ambition that they would never see coming. When dawn broke over the city, it washed the streets in gold, and Nathan was already awake, already moving. He dressed with purpose, choosing his clothes as carefully as armor. He didn't need charm. He didn't need validation. He needed strategy, patience, and a way to ensure that the people who had laughed at him would eventually wonder why they had ever thought he was weak. Outside, the city buzzed, oblivious, while he stepped into the crowd, invisible and unremarkable, carrying nothing but a mind sharpened into quiet, unstoppable force. Every glance, every casual word exchanged that morning, would feed into what he was building. By the time the world noticed Nathan again, it would be on his terms, not theirs. The first day of the rest of his life had begun not with fireworks, nor with anger, nor with public spectacle. It began with a single, deliberate step into the unknown. Guided by a clarity only loss could provide, he would rise. But they would never see it coming. The city had a way of whispering secrets to those willing to listen. For Nathan, every street corner, every hurried passerby, every glass window reflecting sunlight off polished steel became a lesson. A puzzle, a map. He moved with purpose now. But purpose had a new flavor. It was quiet, calculated, invisible. He no longer sought approval or recognition. He sought leverage. His first steps were small, almost invisible. A meeting with an old acquaintance in a cafe tucked behind a row of shuttered boutiques. A conversation about investments. Subtly probing what was possible, what doors might open. Nathan's words were careful, measured. His silence often more persuasive than speech. People underestimated him because they remembered the man who smiled politely while being humiliated. But that man no longer existed. He was a shadow reshaping itself in light. Later that week, he visited a small, unassuming office downtown. It smelled of paper and ambition, the kind that wasn't flashy, but necessary. He signed documents he barely understood but would soon master. He invested money he had saved quietly. Not for luxury, not for status, but for options. Nathan was building foundations while the world remained distracted by appearances, by gossip, by laughter that no longer mattered. At night, in the sparsely furnished apartment, he pored over books he had ignored for years. Not novels, not idle distractions, but texts on strategy, human behavior, and finance. He wrote plans on blank pages, connecting dots, mapping contingencies. Each line, each calculation, felt like a small reclamation. For the first time, he realized that the humiliation he had endured, the laughter, the cruelty, had gifted him something more valuable than love or companionship. Clarity. He began to notice people noticing him again. Not because he sought attention, but because his presence had changed. A colleague in the cafe glanced his way, curiosity in their eyes. A store clerk lingered a little longer than necessary. Nathan acknowledged none of it. He had learned that presence was not performance. It was quiet authority. Yet the first real test of his reinvention came unexpectedly. He received an anonymous email, just a few lines, hinting that Samantha was planning a public event, an event designed, as always, to showcase her success and make sure everyone remembered. She had won. Nathan could have ignored it. Most men would have. Most men would have drowned themselves in anger, in revenge fantasies, in the comfort of self-pity. But Nathan saw opportunity. He began to study her patterns, her public appearances, her favored venues, the journalists she courted. He did not confront her. He did not message her. He observed, calculated, recorded. Every detail was a thread, every misstep a potential leverage point. This was not about vengeance yet. This was about understanding, about turning the predictable arrogance of others into an advantage he could never have possessed if he had remained the man they thought he was. One night, alone in his apartment, Nathan stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath him. Lights flickered on in apartment towers, in offices, in streets below. He felt a thrill, a kind of quiet joy that came from knowing something nobody else knew. The man they had dismissed was no longer limited by their perceptions. Every insult, every slight, every condescending remark was now fuel. He imagined her laughing at some gathering, certain of her superiority, oblivious to the careful, deliberate steps Nathan was taking. He pictured the exact moment she would realize she had underestimated him. But he did not smile with cruelty. That was a temptation he refused. Instead, he smiled with focus, with anticipation, with a patience that only those who have been truly humiliated can master. By the end of the week, Nathan had positioned himself in 3 new ventures, small enough to go unnoticed, strategic enough to matter. He had made contacts that would serve him in ways he could not yet disclose, each one a silent ally, each one unaware that he was no longer the man they thought they knew. His transformation was subtle, almost invisible, but those who ignored it would soon regret it. And in the quiet moments, when the city seemed to pause for him alone, Nathan reflected on the truth that had become his guiding principle. Destruction could be a gift if one was willing to rebuild from it. The man who had been nothing was already becoming something more formidable than Samantha, more formidable than her laughter, more formidable than the world that had mocked him. He was no longer invisible. He was deliberate. He was patient. And he was unstoppable in ways no one had ever imagined. The first hint of spring carried a sharp edge that cut through the city's haze, leaving streets glistening from melted snow and air smelling faintly of possibility. Nathan walked with the same measured precision he had cultivated since the night he had walked out into the snow. But now, there was something different in the rhythm of his steps. Confidence, not the shallow kind people flaunted in mirrors, but a quiet, grounded certainty that came from months of preparation, observation, and strategy. He arrived at a sleek office tower, its glass facade reflecting the sunlight and the movement of the city below. Today was not a casual meeting. Today was the first tangible step in turning his invisible plans into undeniable reality. His new venture, a small, strategic investment firm, had its first significant pitch, a partnership that, if secured, would place him in a position to influence decisions that mattered. Inside the conference room, executives with carefully tailored suits and rehearsed smiles waited. Nathan entered alone, briefcase in hand, posture straight, eyes scanning the room with calm authority. They had likely never expected the man who had been humiliated, mocked, and dismissed to arrive here, composed, articulate, and subtly commanding the space. He began his presentation, voice measured, calm, precise. Each word was deliberate, each pause intentional. Charts, projections, and strategic insights flowed seamlessly from him, evidence of a mind that had spent months sharpening itself in silence. No one interrupted. No one whispered. For the first time, Nathan was not fighting to be heard. He was being listened to. By the end of the meeting, handshakes were exchanged, contracts signed, and Nathan left the room with a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with ego. This was only the beginning. Every new alliance, every strategic move, was a step toward reclaiming what had been taken, not just material gains, but respect, influence, and the quiet dominance that came from being underestimated. The same week, he received an invitation, carefully worded, publicized enough to be noticed but subtle enough to avoid the assumption of obligation. It was from Samantha, a gala celebrating a new business achievement, a public statement of her continued success. She did not know he would attend. He did not intend to confront her. but the timing was exquisite. The night of the gala, Nathan arrived quietly, dressed in understated elegance. He was neither flashy nor attention-seeking, yet every movement carried control, precision, and quiet power. Samantha saw him across the room, her smile faltering just for a fraction of a second before she masked it with practiced charm. The first glance, the recognition that the man she had mocked was no longer powerless, was all Nathan needed. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he observed, allowing the scene to unfold like a play. Colleagues, competitors, and opportunists mingled, unaware that the man they had once dismissed was quietly recalibrating the entire room. Every conversation Nathan entered, every interaction, subtly shifted the balance. Offers were made, partnerships reconsidered, and eyes followed him with curiosity, even envy, without knowing why. Later, Samantha's family approached, eager to parade their pride. Nathan acknowledged them politely. A nod here, a smile there. Each gesture controlled and deliberate. He did not reveal the depth of the transformation, nor did he need to. The power of perception was far stronger than the blunt force of confrontation. When Samantha finally confronted him, it was subtle, her words coated in charm, curiosity, and barely concealed caution. "Nathan," she said, "it's surprising to see you here." Her eyes searched for weakness, for any trace of the man she had called nothing. There was none. Nathan smiled faintly, deliberately, but his eyes remained calm, unreadable. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he replied evenly, letting the words carry weight without theatrics. It was not arrogance. It was proof that absence, patience, and careful preparation could transform humiliation into authority. As the night wore on, Nathan moved through the gala like a force the crowd could not name, commanding attention without demanding it. And all the while, Samantha realized that every insult, every public declaration of superiority, had failed to predict the most important truth. A man left with nothing could become unstoppable, not despite his losses, but because of them. When the gala ended, Nathan left quietly, just as he had entered. Outside, the streets glistened under wet streetlights, and he walked alone, aware of a shift that had begun, not just in the city, but in the people who had once underestimated him. He carried no gloating, no revenge, only the certainty that the next moves were his to make, carefully, deliberately, and invisibly. For the first time since the divorce, Nathan understood something profound. Power did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered, moved silently, and struck when the world least expected it. And Nathan had learned to speak in that language. The morning sun struck the city with gold and sharp clarity, catching on the glass towers like it was announcing something new, something inevitable. Nathan stood at the edge of a balcony in his newly acquired office, the skyline sprawling endlessly before him. For years, he had observed the world from a distance, quietly, patiently, and now, he commanded it, not with noise, not with fury, but with precision, control, and a kind of quiet authority that made people move without realizing they were moving at all. It had been months since the divorce, months since Samantha had pronounced him nothing. And yet, here he was, not the man she remembered, not the man she had dismissed, but a force she had never imagined existed. Every investment, every alliance, every calculated risk had been a deliberate step toward reclamation. Nathan had rebuilt not just a life, but a version of himself that could no longer be underestimated. His phone buzzed, a message, short, carefully crafted. He didn't need to read it to know who it was from. Samantha. The words on the screen were thinly veiled charm, laced with curiosity, with an edge of panic she didn't yet understand. She had seen glimpses of him at events, heard whispers, noticed eyes lingering too long, but she had not yet realized the scale of the man before her. Nathan smiled faintly and put the phone away. She would come to understand, eventually. That was enough. The moment she believed herself untouchable, the moment she thought she had already won, Nathan had begun moving in silence. And silence, as he had learned, could be devastatingly loud when deployed with patience. The first meeting of the day brought him face to face with a board of executives eager to close a deal that would redefine their industry. He moved through it like a maestro, orchestrating opinions, guiding decisions, subtly influencing outcomes without ever raising his voice. By the time the meeting ended, he had not only secured the deal but positioned himself as an indispensable figure, someone whose absence could unravel months of strategy. The irony was not lost on him. The man dismissed as powerless now held leverage, unimaginable to those who had laughed at him. Later, at a charity gala she herself attended, Samantha finally confronted him fully, her carefully constructed confidence cracking at the edges. "Nathan," she began, the tone cautious now, I didn't expect to see you like this." Her eyes searched for vulnerability, for that old weakness she once mocked. There was none. Nathan looked at her, steady, composed, calm. "You said I was nothing," he said softly, almost conversationally. But every word carried the weight of months of strategy, of silent preparation. "I was listening." Her smile faltered. She realized in that moment that she had not just underestimated him, she had misjudged him entirely. All the years of belittling, the casual cruelty, the laughter in front of friends and family, they had done nothing to stop the man he had become. If anything, they had built him into something unstoppable. There was no public spectacle, no confrontation, no dramatic collapse. Nathan did not gloat. He did not strike. He merely existed in the room with the authority of someone who had mastered himself and, by extension, the world around him. The power was subtle, pervasive, undeniable. Samantha stepped back, and for the first time, truly saw him. The realization hit hard. The man she had discarded, the one she had labeled nothing, had become far more than she could control, more than she could anticipate, and far beyond the reach of her previous arrogance. Nathan turned away, letting her stand there with that truth settling around her. He did not need to celebrate. He did not need recognition. His victory was quiet, total, and absolute. He had taken the destruction she had wrought and used it to create a life, a presence, and a force that no mockery could undo. Walking out into the night, the city buzzing with indifferent life, Nathan felt the strange, exhilarating peace of someone who had faced annihilation and emerged unbroken, unshakable, and unstoppable. Every step was deliberate, every breath a claim to the world that he now understood fully. He was not defined by anyone else's judgment. He was defined by his own power, patience, and vision. And Samantha, watching, understanding slowly, too late, would have to live with the knowledge that the man she once mocked as nothing had become everything. Nathan disappeared into the streets, unseen, unassailable, a force rebuilt from humiliation, silence, and relentless determination. The man she thought she had destroyed was no longer a character in her story. He was the author of his own, and no one, not even her, could write over that. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories.